Hello and welcome to Comedy in a Nutshell, the podcast where I talk to comedians about comedy and what it means to them. You know, oftentimes when I'm out and about, I get asked my opinion on things, and I always respond the same way. I'm sorry, I don't work here. For more about me and my podcasts and the comedians that I've seen, visit my website, thecomedynerd.com. I love talking to the people in comedy about comedy. If you'd like to hear what they have to say as much as I do, then please like, subscribe, rate, review, and share the podcast. Thank you. My guest this episode is not only an extraordinary singing talent, but in 2019 she decided to join the ranks of musical comedians, and in 2020 won Audience Choice at the Musical Comedy Awards. In a few years since then, she's made an indelible mark on the comedy circuit and been marked out by the press as one to watch. It's musical comedian Amy Webber. Well, before we get to talk about Amy Webber comedian, let's talk about Amy Webber singer a little bit, because in your Edinburgh show you talk about your CV, obviously, which we'll get onto, but you've got an extraordinary CV as a singer. Why don't you run us through that a little bit first?
So, yeah, when I was a kid, I did little bits of performing, you know, bits of musical theatre, dance, a little Sunday school. And I finally got myself a one-to-one singing teacher who said, you should have lessons with me, but I teach opera. And I was like, oh, opera, you know, I'd never listened to an opera. We'd never been to the opera as a family, but I thought, okay, well, if this guarantees me a ticket to a career on a stage, I'll do it. And it just got out of hand, and I ended up doing it at uni. And it wasn't until I auditioned to do my master's in opera that the head of vocals went, she said, I'm just going to ask, do you actually like opera? And I went, no, I don't. And then she said, all right, well, you know, I recommend you don't do a master's then in opera and you just have a few years out. And I'm really grateful for that, because I kind of just got blinded by, I want to be on stage. And I forgot really that I don't connect to opera at all. And then after that, I realized that I love pop and I love jazz and I love writing. With opera, I couldn't find my creative voice or my creative freedom. You know, you're just performing other people's songs that were written hundreds of years ago, oftentimes, and being told what to do by the director and the conductor. And now the transition from me doing pop and jazz, then doing comedy, then directing and producing my own one-woman show feels like, now I've found what I like doing.
Right.
You know, but it took me a while to get there.
So during all this study and performance and recital and what have you, where was comedy within all of that?
Nowhere. Yeah, no, honestly, it was nowhere. I mean, occasionally I would do a slightly funny song in one of my opera repertoire classes, but really opera, when you get a funny opera song, you got to do funny in inverted commas, because it's just not that funny. So I didn't do any comedy. I didn't think of myself as a comedian. I would always try and make my friends laugh. You know, if I went to a house party at uni, people would say, oh, my friend Rebecca said you were funny. And I'll be like, yes. You know, I was always aiming to make people laugh. But it wasn't till I was 29 that I did that I even wrote a funny song and dared to perform it. So, I did lots of classical gigs. I did lots of new music, you know, contemporary classical, moved on to singing with a jazz band, moved on to creating a pop band and writing our own tunes. And we did some festivals, got played on Six Music. And then all of that now is parked up in a sense for me to do comedy.
So what was it then, I think in 2019, that you decided, okay, so I've done the opera halls and I've toured doing Gilbert and Sullivan, and then you go, now I want to tell jokes in an attic. What changed? What made that the decision?
I guess the first change was, now I want to write my own music. I think that was the first change. And so I started performing under the name EIMIE. Again, there's a bit in my show that you've seen about that. So I started writing my own pop songs and performing them. And around the same time, when I got the knowledge and power to record, you know, to use technology and microphones and computers and pianos enough to record my own music and my own singing, around that time, I started writing funny songs as well, and thought, okay, well, I'll do my pop gigs, writing my own music, and I'll start experimenting with some comedy. And that was really just a couple of open mic nights in Manchester, and then doing Beat the Frog at Frog and Bucket quite a lot of times. So I really enjoyed it there, and the student crowds seemed to go down well with them, so I would keep going back. And I guess in a way, then the comedy took over. I realized there was more hunger and more love for me doing comedy than there was necessarily space in the music industry for me doing like straight singing. And so, you know, I've gone toward the one that seems to buy me more stage time and more fans, which is comedy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you say about getting you stage time, but I mean, you obviously, from what I've seen, you look like you're having just the best time. Do you get more out of performing musical comedy than you do performing music in itself?
I enjoy both, but I guess when I'm performing comedy, I feel like I'm being more authentic. So the audience really get to know me. And I love that when people come up to me after a gig and they're very familiar and they're like, Amy, and then they say, oh, sorry, you know, we haven't met, but I feel like I know you from seeing your show. And I really love that. And sometimes it can be harder in music to bear your soul as quickly, because, you know, what you can portray in a 3-minute song with lyrics is much less than the amount of information you can get across in a 3-minute skit. So in that sense, I think the audience know me better. I'm able to be really truthfully honest, and being funny is part of me. So in my pop songs, it was very hard to be funny. It's hard to write a pop song that's funny without it turning into a comedy song. So when you're doing, you know, 8 very sincere heartbreak love songs in a set, and then suddenly you chuck in one about, I don't know what, a comedy issue, it doesn't fit. So that was the other thing. I wasn't finding much space to be funny at all in my original music, which is why I think comedy felt like a release.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were there people or events that inspired you when you decided to take the leap into musical comedy? Was there people that you had in mind?
Do you know what? So my upbringing didn't involve much comedy. I know this may be a question that you'll ask me later, but I guess when we were kids, like, we read the Twits, and from my dad, me and my sister have inherited quite a crude sense of humor. So we love, you know, like fart jokes, bogey jokes, poo jokes. And as a family, we used to watch Green Wing. Did you watch Green Wing?
Oh, I love Green Wing, yeah.
Really quite like dry British, sometimes quite sexualized, but we used to watch that and I really enjoyed that. And we also watched a lot of extras. So that's the kind of humor I grew up on. And my mum and dad, I never saw them watching like live comedy on the TV or in real life. Yeah. I never saw them watching musical comedy. And it honestly wasn't till about 2 years ago that I even watched a Bill Bailey sketch. So I don't know. Sometimes I worry that that's bad. It's the same. It was the same when I was studying opera. Okay. So some of my peers would know loads of opera singers. They'd sing loads of operas and they could listen to someone and say, oh, I know that's that soprano, blah, blah, blah. Right. Whereas, and it's the same in comedy. Some people are complete comedy nerds and they know, you know, they could name 20 famous musical comedians. I just don't work like that, I think, as a creative, and I never really have. I just like to do my own thing and hope it's good. I think I always get worried when I watch others that either I'm going to copy them accidentally or that I might sit there and be jealous. And I know jealousy is a sort of horrible emotion, but it's one that we should all talk about more, because as creatives, you can't help but feel it when other people are on a massive stage. And I watched Bill Bailey and he was great. And I thought, oh, what if I never get to do this? What if I never get to perform in front of a big adoring crowd? I'll be so gutted. So it's not exactly jealousy, like in a nasty way, but it's just like this sense of real longing that I think sometimes holds me back from watching others. I watch a lot of comedy, I suppose. Right. But not on like YouTube or in my room. When I'm at a gig, I watch it. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent now, but so I didn't really have any musical comedian inspiration. It was just, I just did what I thought was fun for me. Yeah.
You talked there a little bit about watching other comedians and about jealousy and other emotions, but as you watch comedy, do you watch it as an audience member or do you watch it as a comedian? Are you listening to the mechanics of what they're doing or just waiting for the punchline?
Good question. I think mostly I just watch it as an audience, but I think maybe in just the last 2 or 3 months, I've started to take more notice of the structure of a joke. And, so I've got the show You Came to See, No Previous Experience. Yeah. And my aim for next year is to make that 45 into an hour and to really tighten the writing and the jokes. But I'm already thinking about 2025 and I'm like, shit, I guess the natural progression is that I'd have a whole new hour. And so I'm starting to think a lot more about how on earth I'm going to put together another show, because, the 45 that I've got already is a culmination of stuff I thought about and wrote during lockdown. I almost had 2 years to put that together of doing fuck all else. Yeah. So it's like now I'm starting to feel a bit apprehensive about how I'm going to write new material. I still feel very new to this. I still don't have like a group around me of comedians. Like I'm still quite new to the scene. Again, this is in inverted commas, but like, for example, I've got my birthday in a couple of weeks and I've made a little list of friends to invite. I haven't got a comedian friend on there. I do have comedian friends, but we're not close enough to invite them. There's not any comedians there's maybe like a couple, but that I would go and like meet for a drink, just me and them outside of a gig. Yeah. So I just feel still very much on the outskirts of the scene. And therefore I feel like I have a lack of people to collaborate with and write with and bounce ideas off. So right now I'm going to gigs and I'm like, shit, I need to start working on my show for 2025. I better listen in a comedy way. Yeah.
You mentioned the lockdown there. So obviously you started comedy. Is it 2019 you started doing comedy? Sounds right.
I think I did like 4 gigs that year. Yeah. So I started, but it was a very loose start.
Yeah. And of course it was the best possible time to go out on a new venture. So when lockdown hit, what did that do to your career overall? What did that do to your earliest forays in comedy?
Yeah, so I guess what it did is my career overall just came to a complete stop. And it was when Rishi Sunak suggested that people in the arts should consider retraining that I first wrote my CV song. So it was kind of as a play on that, to say, well, I'll put my CV into a song then and see what other jobs I could get with my, completely pointless qualifications, unless they're in the arts. And then that's kind of what the whole show is born out of, as you've seen. And I wrote most of the other bits during lockdown, where I was like, okay, well, I'll show the audience that I could be a teacher. I'll show them I could be a music therapist. But really, I'm quite bad at all those jobs and quite unemployable. So it was a really lucky time. And like I say, I was just doing my master's in pop. So I just figured out how to write my own music, how to wire up a microphone and connect it to the laptop and stuff. So for me, weirdly, lockdown came at a good time and I missed a lot of performing opportunities. But I suppose because in one sense or another, I've been performing since my teenage years, that wasn't such a worry for me.
Yeah.
Like stage time, because in a way I'm used to holding a crowd or speaking to a crowd. So it was just a time to try and write my show, which I didn't even know was going to be a show. They were just little sketches to me. And then finally I realized I could put them all together and go to Edinburgh. It's a surprise to me.
Did you get an opportunity during the lockdown periods to perform comedy? Like, did you do Zoom, things like that?
I think I did a couple, like I did one for BBC Upload and I did a performance on Radio Manchester where I was living at the time. And then I did the Funny Women Awards. So they were all Zoom, but that was it. I didn't do any other gigs. Again, at that point, I didn't have any contacts anyway, so I wouldn't have known what comedy nights were or who was running them. And I also didn't really have any good footage of me performing.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So, yes, so having done all of this live performance, and then you go into comedy again, we're back in those few gigs in 2019. What was different about doing musical comedy? What expectations did you have doing it and what surprises did you find?
My biggest surprise was how much people laughed. Like a lot of the time, I just don't even find funny songs that funny. I would rather go and watch stand-up myself. But I think because it's through song, it makes it funnier to people. I just think it's so different for me as a listener because I'm thinking about the music or someone's voice or my own voice. But I think when you're listening, there is something funny about, funny songs. Yeah. That was honestly a surprise to me.
So yes, Beat the Frog, you mentioned Manchester. Going into a competition like that quite early on, again, what was the sort of expectation? Was it just going to be a gig, or we'll try it out, we'll see what happens?
Yeah, so I think that Beat the Frog, which I did in May 2019, was my third ever gig. And then I won. And then you get invited back for a spot if you win, which I did in like March, which was, I think, my fifth gig. And then it was lockdown. Yeah. So all my gigs were like, months apart. And they were also, by the way, they were my old songs, which I used to do with a ukulele. So it's a different set to now. I didn't use my mini keyboard or my laptop. I used to do like 2 songs with a ukulele, which I don't do anymore. And they make me cringe. But anyway, Beat the Frog, yeah, I was really nervous. I was really nervous that I would get gonged off, and I was nervous for the embarrassment. At that point, again, I wasn't trying to be a comedian, really. It was just my friends were like, they're really funny and you've made people laugh, so why don't you do it at Beat the Frog? And I guess with all that performing experience and confidence that I had in one sense, I was like, okay, I'm just going to do it. And if I get gonged off, that's it. But my aim was just to try and do the 5 minutes, and I got through and I won, and it was a really good feeling. And it made me realize, not necessarily that I'm funny, but it made me realize that if I get the songs and the tone right, I can entertain a room of 200 people and get them on my side. And I think that was the empowering bit. Yeah, because I still don't know if I'm funny, really, but I think I am accepting that I'm entertaining.
Interesting way of looking at it. I talk to comedians all the time about their material being self-deprecating, but they're very rarely self-deprecating in our conversation.
Well, maybe I am a bit funny. I'm very confident that I'm funny in like my personal life, with my friends, or if I meet someone and they go, "Oh, you're funny," I'll be like, "Cool, thanks. Yes, I am." Whereas on stage, I'm just being silly. And, sometimes like the run I did in Edinburgh, my show was at 2:40 in the afternoon. So I think people were quite reserved in some senses. And they weren't like, it wasn't like really loud laughter. I've definitely done gigs in the evening times that with the same show and it's been louder. But I've learned to accept that if people are just really listening and you're selling out, then that's great. And it doesn't need to be like people, pissing themselves laughing to be good and to be entertaining.
Yeah. You also mentioned the Funny Women, which, as you said, was online. So with things like the Gong shows and the Funny Women, how do you feel about those competitions or competitions in general?
Well, I think you've got to take them with a pinch of salt. They're obviously subjective. I've won some, I've got to the semi-finals of some, and I've not got through to some others. So it is subjective, but if you do well, it's great on your CV. Yeah. So it's a win-win, isn't it? Yeah. It's a good way to get your name out if you do well. And if you don't get through, you just go, oh, well, the application video wasn't quite what they wanted, or they didn't like me, and that's okay. So I think, you just got to not get too obsessed with them or with your progression within them. The Musical Comedy Awards, that's skipping forward, I guess, to post-lockdown. But when I won that was such a surprise. I had no idea I was going to win. I was having a bit of a row with my boyfriend on that day, and then we actually broke up a few weeks later. So I was in quite a negative headspace. And then they were like, and the audience prize goes to Amy Webber. And I was like, what? And it was another Beat the Frog moment, actually, where I sort of thought like, oh my God, what? I've managed to like captivate these people into voting for me out of all the other people. And I couldn't really believe it. But competitions have served me well. And I would encourage people to do them, but just not get sad if they don't get through.
Yeah. What about other types of criticism, like reviews and, well, even down to heckles? How do you respond to feedback in the room or in the press?
So I've never really had like a really negative heckle, actually. Sometimes there's just someone a bit drunk shouting, and I sort of go into teacher mode and try and say something slightly cutting, but ultimately quite harmless and charming. And then, the audience are with you, then everyone kind of turns against that one person, and it normally is enough to shut them up. But I haven't had many of those, thank goodness, because that I've seen that be really difficult, especially when it's a female on stage and there's a man shouting at them. It's a bit it's just a bit awkward, because when things get real, when emotions get real, you know, when it's real anger or real threat, it sort of ceases to be funny in that moment. But I've not had much of that. And then in terms of reviews, well, I've had like 2 reviews, I guess. One very early on in my comedy back in 2019 when it was Beat the Frog World Series final, and then one in this Edinburgh. And both of them, when I initially read them, kind of made my heart sink. And I thought, oh no. I think one of them was from Chortle, and it said, girl with ditty about song about sex, not very original, back to the drawing board, Amy. And when I first read it, I remember thinking like, oh my God, like, he's saying I'm bad. And then there was a sort of anger of like, why is he referring to me as a girl when I'm 29? And then I tried to sort of think about it a bit more. And actually it was a start, along with some other factors, of a turning point of me putting my ukulele in the cupboard, because I thought, he's right. It's not original to write a song about sex with a ukulele. It's really not. It's been done a lot. And actually, that's not the story I'm trying to tell as an artist. And I mean, maybe my show about looking for a job is still not quite the story I'm trying to tell. And I believe I'll get there one day with what I'm trying to say. So I tried to look at that review in like, take it for what it is. It is just someone's opinion, but also it's someone with a hell of a load of experience in comedy. So I was just like, yeah, he's kind of right. And it was the same in Edinburgh with my review from The Telegraph, from Tristan Fane Saunders. And he said something like, the joke writing wasn't always as good as the spirited delivery. And again, I was like, yeah, he's right. My sort of where I feel most confident is performing and delivery. It's not sitting in a room and writing a joke set up with a punchline. That's still very, very new to me. And actually a lot of the jokes in my show, I've collaborated with people and had help writing those. Now I'm starting to find my confidence and feet at writing my own, but so much of comedy is collaborative anyway. So it just made me think like, yeah, he's right. I want to tighten up the jokes so that a critic can't say her delivery was good and she's a great performer, but the gags aren't all there. And that's something for me to work on. So I think I've tried to take those 2 reviews that were, when I first read them, I thought, oh no, it's negative, as like, actually it's not that negative. It's constructive feedback. Again, I'm lucky that I haven't had any really horrible reviews. And sometimes reviewers can be, spineless, unhelpful, and, bigoted in what they write. But I haven't received a review like that, luckily.
Well, let's talk about your Edinburgh show. When you were going into putting your 45 minutes together, what was the thing that the show was intended to be about at its origin? And how did that change as you got closer to the festival and as you started doing the festival?
So I guess it was just always meant to be a laugh about me looking for a job, and quite a surface level show. But then when I toyed about with the ending, which took me a while to come to, as I talk about in the show, so you'll know, and I end with my personal statement, and it's quite personal, the personal statement. It's littered with jokes, but there's some sad bits at the end when I talk about my career not being where I want it to be. And I still stand by the fact, when I was a teenager, I really thought I was sort of destined for greatness on big stages. And I do think if the 13-year-old me, as I say, could see where I am now, that she would be gutted. She'd be like, what? Like, you haven't even been in like a 2-month production on the West End. You haven't even had an agent. She'd be absolutely devastated, because all I wanted to do was be on stages. Anyway, I guess I'm coming round to being on stages, a different path. And ultimately I'm going to be performing as Amy Webber instead of, playing Nancy and Oliver or whatever I thought I might be doing, singing other people's music. And hopefully one day I'm just going to be singing my own. But so when I added that personal statement in, I had a couple of sessions with a great director and producer called Jonathan Woolley, who produces Stamptown and Jack Tucker and lots of other things. And he said, do you know what? He said, it doesn't quite make sense having your personal statement at the very end and being very honest when you haven't been very honest through the show. It's all been very surface level, quite silly. And that's when I decided to write the bits that you've seen, the in between the songs that tell a little story about a part of my career that I tried and failed. So then the show, that was in about May. I got that feedback. Obviously Edinburgh's in August. And that was when I really thought, okay, this show has a bit more substance now. And Johnny said that. He said, look, you can either take out that personal statement and keep it all surface level, or you can litter in some more personal tales, some that may be a bit tragic, and make the show have a bit more depth. And I said, always, I'll go for the depth. And if you can make deep things and, you know, funny, then I think that's a real skill, or it's fun. So then the show was a bit more about me as a kind of, I don't know, failing in inverted commas performer. And I like the end of the show because it does make people sad. And there are lots of people who've cried, or everyone goes quite quiet. And then obviously I break it with one final joke. But yeah, it ended up having a bit more meaning than I think I set out for. But I love that, and I'm glad it did. Yeah. And someone said, well, you know, if you get an agent out of Edinburgh, the show won't work next year. And the reason this show sells, like the Telegraph review said, is because I play this underdog character. So anyway, I haven't had an offer from an agent, and I'm hoping if I can just go 8 more months, I'll get through the next Edinburgh without an agent, so I can stay authentic. And also, you know, no one seems to want to sign me right now, and fair enough, it's not the right time. So I can wait.
For all of your preparation and your writing and your support and previews, did the show, or how much did the show mutate from the first night of performance to the end of the festival?
Not that much. I changed a few little bits. The bit about therapy, I changed. I'm not sure which one you saw, but initially it was a conversation about dumping my therapist, but I just couldn't find the funny thing in that. So I changed it to a skit about texting my dad about therapy. So I changed that bit. And apart from that, it didn't change that much. And again, this is something, you know, I didn't know. I know some people in Edinburgh, after a show, every show they're making notes, they're changing bits, they're tweaking bits. I didn't do that. Maybe that's like the wrong thing to do. But because I went without anyone telling me what to do, I just did my show every day. Yeah. And there were little bits that tweaked. And of course, as a performer, I think I got better. So my crowd work was probably stronger towards the end. And there were a couple of tiny gags that kept flopping, so I took them out, but nothing really changed that much.
How was your festival experience as a whole?
I anticipated it a lot. I was very scared about going. I was scared of, you know, just actually leaving your room and going to another room for a month is quite scary without any of your friends and family, without the support. I just had a breakup in June. And so it was like suddenly my life is a new normal without the support of my ex-boyfriend. And again, didn't have anyone sort of telling me what to do or helping me, you know, like no producer or collaborator or director being like, don't forget to do a Facebook post on this day, or like, you must have your posters ordered by this date. And like, have you sorted your tech person? And this person would be the best person for you. Have you done your sound check? Like, so there was a lot to think about and organize. And I guess I'm quite an organized person. And in the end, it all went smoothly. But I did anticipate it a lot. And it was a bit of a heavy weight on my shoulders for the whole of the year, pretty much, because I booked it in like January. And then I was like, oh shit, like, what am I going to do? And of course, now I've done it once, I feel way more confident. But once I got there, it was quite like, I was quite head down, to be honest. I thought I would network a lot more and be sociable a lot more. But in the end, I either couldn't find the right people, you know, people go between like 5 or 6 bars, and I never wanted to just like walk in on my own. So if one of my few friends that I could text wasn't out, I would just go home. And also late nights and drinking don't go well with your vocal health.
Mm.
And although Edinburgh, of course, is important for networking, I prioritized, I want to be the best performer I can be. And so there were nights when people were out and it got to 12 or something. And I was like, I need to go. And I know if I'd stayed out, maybe I would have been brushing shoulders with a great producer who might want to have produced my show next year and helped me. But I just thought, I can't let my audience down. And by this point, by 6 days in, I started having the sellouts. So then it really felt like people are investing in me and investing their time in me. I think maybe I would have gone out more and been a bit more reckless with my body and voice had I been getting 5 people a day. But because I was getting the sellouts and getting 50 people a day, I was like, oh, word is spreading. Someone must be thinking that this is good. So I better give them their 7 quid's worth and be healthy. And in general as well, my body I'm quite a sensitive person physically. I can have 3 drinks and go to bed at midnight and just feel really rough the next day. So I didn't network as much as I hoped I would, or make as many friends as I hoped I would. But it was my first year, so I guess I was just a year 7.
Well, the show I got to see at the Mash House was interesting in itself because that was one of your 2 tech fail nights.
Yes.
Which, I mean, obviously not ideal for you, but I love situations like that because it means that I'm getting something that a lot of other people aren't going to get. I get a unique experience. How do you react in situations like that where you're about to perform and something isn't happening the way you expect, and now you've got to do your whole show either without power or whatever else the situation might be?
I was pretty flustered. I felt pretty negative. I felt frustrated that I didn't have the tech knowledge to fix it. And in the end, it was actually a broken cable. But the broken cable was making the computer react in really weird ways. So it seemed like it was a computer thing and seemed really complex. And I rang my friend on the second one where the tech broke, because I got home that night and it worked. And then I got in the next day and I plugged it in. I thought, I can't believe it. And because everything's such a rush, I get in my room with like 8 minutes to set up. So I plug it in and I'm like, it's not working. And they're like, we're opening doors in 6 minutes. And I'm like, oh. And I rang my friend who's like a computer specialist with the program I'm using. And even they were like, I don't know. I was like reading what was on the screen and they were like, I just don't know why it would be saying that. Have you tried a new cable? And I said, well, no, but the cable worked yesterday night. And anyway, it was the cable in the end. But it was hard. That was a hard bit. I thought I could cancel it. That wasn't an option for me, knowing that 50 people were downstairs. I thought I could cry. And then I tried to do a few deep breaths. And throughout my life, there have been times where I've had quite high anxiety about various things. And I have got, especially in my late 20s and now, I've got really good at being able to calm and control those things because they're often irrational. Well, nearly always irrational. And so I just did a few deep breaths and I thought to myself, and I think this when I get overwhelmed by any kind of performance, I thought, it's only art. It's only art. And art is meant to be fun and it's meant to be respite and it's meant to be escape and it's meant to be entertaining, but it's not meant to make you cry if something small goes wrong. So I did a few deep breaths and I adapted in the moment, which I think most performers would be able to do, but I'm definitely good at adapting with some chaos. And that comes with, a lot of performance. I've done a lot of teaching. I've done a lot of teaching in special educational needs schools where you have to adapt in the moment. You plan to do one thing and things happen and you can't. Or when I was doing opera, I was doing that Gilbert and Sullivan, we would do open air performances in the most like random places, and we're meant to be coming in, but our entry is on a river and the boat's 2 minutes late and someone has to improvise for 2 minutes when that is not scripted. So I think I'm quite good at acting in chaos moments and rising to the challenge, and I did, and I was so relieved that the audiences on those 2 shows didn't seem to mind or particularly notice, but I knew how smooth the transitions should have been. But so I just said, it's only art, and I just got on with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a great show. I really, really
Thank
enjoyed
you
it.
so much.
Even without the power that you were expecting it to have, the sudden a cappella version was a joy. It was a great show. I really enjoyed it. How far, I mean, you've alluded to this a little bit. How far does improvisation play a role in the show, or if you're doing a 10-minute turn? Because as a musical comic, when you've got an inherent structure by performing a song, how much freedom do you allow within the song that you write, or how much freedom around that do you have for audience interaction or improvising when something doesn't go the way you want it to?
I really like improvising, actually, and I think I would like to find a way where there's more of it in my show, because at the moment there's like 4 different moments when I speak to the audience, and within that often I speak to 2 people apart from the last time, so I speak to like 7 people in an average 45 minutes, and I really enjoy that. And then song wise, I always improvise the funeral song right at the beginning in my CV, and apart from that, that's it. So I would like to make more space for that, because I enjoy it.
What about your persona, if you like, the person that you are on stage? And you mentioned about honesty in your show. How much of that person is you, and how much is it the character of you?
I think I think I would go as far to say it is actually just all me. Obviously, when I'm impersonating the music lecturer or impersonating the therapist, then I'm them. So I'm not me. But the CV song is me, is quite literally my CV. Apart from the D of E, Duke of Edinburgh Award, that's a lie. I never did those. It just rhymed. And it seems like a classic thing that a lot of teenagers have on their CV. And yeah, definitely all the little speaky bits in between, the personal statement, the audience interaction. I am just being me. Yeah, which is a nice feeling, because when I started, I didn't know how much I would be able to be me. Right. So it's been quite liberating to find subject matters that I can talk about that allow me to just tell a story, I guess, of my life, but try and make it funny. Try.
But you also essentially you have a uniform, the shirt and tie, which looks great, by the way.
Thank you.
And you obviously have your keyboard. So are you able to be more yourself because you are in a sense protected by having a cloak and something in front of you, like a totem to hold on to?
Maybe subconsciously, yeah. I'm not sure. I haven't done a gig where I haven't worn my shirt and tie, and I haven't had my keyboard, and I haven't started with doing the CV song. I met someone the other day and voiced this, and they said, "Oh, I run a night in Ipswich. We'll come and get you on. No one will know you. Don't bring your shirt and tie. Don't bring your keyboard, and just try doing 10 stand-up, just so you can try it." And I'm definitely curious to do that, because I feel like the way I worry that the way I'm establishing a rapport with an audience, whether I'm doing a 7-minute set or 45, is right at the beginning. I sing, right? So people kind of go, "Oh, she's good at something," so we can kind of trust her and we can relax into the performance. And I know clowns often talk about this, that as well as being silly or self-deprecating or chaotic or whatever, you have to show a real skill. And that has to come with the chaos. So I think I have a slight fear that if I start a gig without that skill, in inverted commas, of singing, that maybe the audience won't be on my side, that maybe they won't listen to me as much, maybe they won't like or warm to me as much. And so I would love to challenge myself and try a gig without a shirt and tie, without my keyboard, without singing. Or maybe I sing a tiny bit because that's part of who I am, but it's not a full song, you know. Yeah, so I don't know how much it is a sort of safety net blanket.
Well, talking of skills also, this is something I particularly wanted to ask you about it because it absolutely intrigues me. With part of your upbringing in Japan, you speak fluent Japanese. When you throw that in a little bit quite casually in the show, next to me I heard an audible gasp. What I noticed is that you smile, extra wide smile, when you speak Japanese for the first time on stage, and your pitch of your voice goes ever so slightly higher. I've seen it twice. Are you excited because you're, I don't know, pulling the rug out of an audience?
I guess I'm excited because it's a surprise. Yeah. And also, like, I love speaking Japanese. The best bit of that bit, it's happened twice now, is when there's someone comes up to me after and goes, I'm Japanese, or I can speak Japanese. And so it is this kind of, I also love the idea that some people might think I'm lying. Like that some people might be like, oh my God, like she's like faking Japanese. Like, is that racist? Do you know what I mean? And I love them wondering that and me going like, no, I know exactly what I'm saying. And I think possibly the change of pitch is maybe like, これから日本語喋ったらちょっと I think when I speak Japanese, I maybe just do go a little higher. That might just be like a language thing. Yeah, I think it is, because in my English tone, I mean, I speak about this with my singing teacher, you know, because I still have lessons, and of course do singing work. My speaking tone can be quite low, like la la, like round here, quite raspy sometimes, that kind of grit in my voice. Whereas 日本語を喋ったら絶対もう強いかな. So I'm not, I've never noticed that before, but I'm not speaking the Japanese, like I'm not going, 日本語喋ったら絶対強いかな, like where I speak English, I'm going into this da 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 da, slightly higher placement.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's something for all the vocal specialists listening that might find interesting. But yeah, I just love that bit, and I want to get some more Japanese bits into the show actually, or into my set, because it is different, and people are intrigued by Japan as a culture, and I've had that, you know, amazing privilege to have that insight. And while I was there, loads of funny stuff happened because I was a weird kid and I was in a different country, and I was the only white kid in the school. Like, I did loads of weird shit that I kind of got away with but kind of got bullied for, and I think it's funny, so I'm going to try and get more into my show.
Yeah. What about vice versa? What about playing in Japan?
Ooh, well, I haven't been for a few years now. So the last time I went was April 2019. So I don't think I'd quite done my first gig then. But I might try and go in autumn as a post-Edinburgh treat. I might try and go in autumn next year. Assuming I go again, and assuming the world is still here as we know it. So yeah, I'm gonna get on some Facebook forums and see what events there are in Japan. But I tell you this for free, I am not taking my keyboard all the way to Japan. So I'm gonna have to have figured out a set that doesn't involve that, because if I go to Japan, I'm not going to do work. And if I take that keyboard, I'll end up doing work, because I do my comedy with that keyboard, but also a lot of my songwriting work, I have to use that keyboard. So when I go away, I really don't want to take it with me, because otherwise it reminds me of doing stuff. But yeah, I'd love to get some gigs. Have you got any contacts for anyone in Tokyo or Kobe or Osaka? Let me know.
What then so far have been the best and worst experiences you've had in comedy?
I think the best bit is always when I finish a gig. No, the best bit is during a gig when people are just laughing their heads off. There's been a couple of gigs I've done that I can really remember. They're both actually outside of London. One was in Kent last year, and one was in Essex this year. And I got there, and there was a lot of middle-aged people, maybe 40, 50. Everyone had like quite a thick Kent or Essex accent. I was a bit aware that suddenly I was maybe outnumbered by men, and also that maybe I have a bit of a posh voice compared to them. And I sort of thought, oh, maybe they won't like me. And I say we because it was so mutual, but we honestly just had such a fun time. It was just one of those gigs where every little bit I do that's meant to be funny, and then subsequently every little look or aside or ad lib that I did, they just laughed. They just absolutely took it in and loved it. And I think when it's a bit unexpected like that, and also for me, you're out of your comfort zone when you go to a new place or a new town, and you've parked up your car, you don't know where you are, you don't know where the door is, and And, you know, certainly I'm aware that when I enter a space, I'm a woman and I do have a posh sounding voice, posh, not that posh, but, you know, middle class-ish voice. And so I'm always aware of how that might make me look or people perceive me. And I think, oh, maybe they won't like me. Maybe they'll just think I'm a sort of a posh twat or something. And they don't, because I guess I'm not, is the truth. But those gigs have been really fun. And I think then I also love it at the end when people follow me, you know, on Instagram or Facebook and send me a message or come up to me after the show and just say, like, that was hilarious. And it's not about sort of compliments of, oh, your singing was good. I mean, I never know what to say when people say that. I say, well, look, I've studied it for 6 years, so it bloody should be good. But when people just want to say hi, because I get that feeling when I see an amazing performer, whether it's comedy or singing, you just want to like see that person and just go up to them and say, I loved that, or I love you. And so those are the best bits, just doing a great gig. And Edinburgh was a highlight. I think at the time I was too wrapped up in, okay, got to keep my head down and got to keep going to really relish those sold out shows. But looking back, you know, that was such an amazing, I'm so lucky that was my first Edinburgh. That, like, I had set my expectations so low and expected a month of disappointment and crying, and it didn't happen. I didn't cry once, even when the tap broke in the end. And the worst bits, don't know what the worst bits are. I suppose it disheartens me sometimes to see lack of diversity on lineups. It disheartens me sometimes when people make jokes at the expense of someone else. And then when you maybe pluck up the courage to say, I don't know about the use of this word in your set. And then they go, no, I think it's fine, or I find it funny. And those kinds of things dishearten me, I think, when people forget that performing is a platform. And, you know, as much as you can, you should be speaking about your experience and not, taking the piss out of other people. I never do. I mean, I hope in my career I never get cancelled, but as you've seen from my show, there's nothing really to get cancelled for, because I don't take the piss out of any other demographic than basically Amy Webber. So yeah, that's maybe a bit of a disheartening part of comedy. You know, seeing some reviews from Edinburgh that were bigoted, seeing people with a right-wing agenda use comedy to push it through, and seeing people with lots of privilege talk about less privileged groups and then not take ownership when they get called out and told that maybe that's not okay. But, you know, these are things that it's paralleled by things happening globally, right? But you just see it in comedy. And I guess there's other industries as well like that, you know, sexual predators not being called out for fear of people's own career progression or that keeping hold of their contacts and all that kind of stuff that happens in life. You can also see in the comedy industry. So those things are disheartening. But other than that, I do really enjoy it. And I'm excited to see where this takes me. I really hope that comedy could become like a full-time thing for me, or entertainment and comedy. You know, I'd love to be a presenter. I'd love to, there's so many jobs that I'd love to do. And I always have said this, well, I've said this for about the last 6 years. And when I was a kid, that my dream job is to be paid to be Amy Webber. And in some senses, I'm already doing that. But, you know, when I write kids songs or when I sing at a wedding, I'm not quite being Amy Webber. I'm being Amy Webber, but for a client. But when I do comedy, I really feel like I'm just being Amy Webber. So I'd love to do more of that. Yeah.
So you talk about things that you would like to do. Do you have targets, objectives? Do you have like a 5-year plan?
I do. I wrote it last year. It was maybe a bit over optimistic, but I think my plans for the future are like, I'd like to maybe get on doing some music for Radio 4, even though some of the comedy on there is actually a bit stuffy, no offense. I'd like to try and get on the TV for the BBC New Comedy Awards. I'd like to do another Edinburgh, Brighton and Manchester Fringe and continue to grow my followers. And then I guess within 5 years, I would like to get an agent eventually. I'd love to do live at the Apollo. Of course, that's another sort of thing that everyone hopes to do. I would like to, I don't know, write my own show, have it commissioned by the BBC, do a Netflix special, do a tour, sell out tour, you know, all that. So I'd love to be a presenter for Bake Off one day. Once I've sort of at the other end of my career, I guess. I'd like to do some collaborations with some cool people. I want to write some jingles or come and do a little cameo role for people as an opera singer or something. Oh, there's loads of stuff I want to do. I'm not sure how confident I am that I'll get any of those, but I feel hopeful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've brought out some fantastic philosophies while we've been talking. Do you have any sort of watchwords that you stand by when you're performing? I must do this, I mustn't do that. Have you learned any key lessons since you started doing comedy?
Yes. So the key lessons I've learned is if you're doing a gig in a weird space, always acknowledge the space. You know, like if you're doing a gig in a library and there's one dodgy light and there's weirdly 6 kids in the front row, acknowledge that. Yeah. Acknowledge that it's weird. I guess unless you're like the 5th person on and everyone else has done it, but find some way in your set to acknowledge that there's something unusual. And then the other thing I learned was don't ignore anything. So if you're halfway through and 4 people walk in late, acknowledge it. If a chair falls over behind you, acknowledge it, because if you don't, and I've seen people not acknowledge things happening in the space, and it does just look like you're on autopilot. You lose that sense of in the moment spontaneity, which people love. That's what gets the biggest laughs for me and for other shows I've seen. You know, you can be doing great material and then suddenly a bottle clanks at the right moment. You make a gag about your alcoholic mum being there and it gets the biggest laugh of the night. People love those, you know, audiences love those one-of-a-kind moments, like you said about you coming to my show when the tech was broken. So I think that's what I've learnt. Obviously, don't copy anyone's jokes. I mean, that's a sort of classic that everyone knows. Be nice. That's it.
How can we find out about you and where we can come and see you perform?
So the best way is to follow me on Instagram or Facebook, which is Amy Webber Comedian, or you can go to my website, amywebber.co.uk, and you can find out all sorts of stuff on there because I have a bit about singing, a bit about songwriting, and a bit about comedy. And then on Twitter, I'm Amy Webber SOP, S-O-P, that's for soprano, back from the days when I was a soprano. And upcoming shows, I'm doing my first ever full-length show in Bristol in January. That's Friday the 26th of January. And then I'm hoping to get booked in at the Bill Murray in Angel around January, February, and try a few new bits that are going to make my 45 into an hour. Other than that, I don't know, Brighton Fringe in May, Manchester Fringe in July, Edinburgh Fringe in August. So just get it in your diaries now. Time and venue to be confirmed.
Yeah. And so finally, Amy, how would you sum up comedy in a nutshell?
I would say it's a thrilling moment of exposure and vulnerability met with warmth. That's on a good gig, by the way.
Amy, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. That's so fun. I really loved chatting and I really loved your questions. So thank you.